I first met Casey in Greenwich. She was living in what they called Steamboat Flats. It was a beautiful big old apartment house right on the water. And she had a one little apartment right on the little bay at Greenwich. And a friend of mine whom I had known from Girl Scout days, she had been on the national staff with me, had moved into the next apartment. And she and Casey had little tiny patios side by side right there on the water. And Casey, I was staying with my friend Dorothy, and Casey lived right next door. And she and Dorothy were good friends, and they had bought a boat together. They had a little sailboat that they sailed around the Sound in. And I met Casey that way. But I didn't know her very well. I didn't see much of her until a few years after that. She left the Seabury Press. They had been located in Greenwich, and she, being an editor there, was asked to, they moved into a new building in Manhattan on 2nd Avenue. And it was the National Episcopal Church headquarters building, and I think it still is. And the Seabury Press moved from Greenwich to Manhattan. And Casey was starting to commute, and she hated commuting. And Casey was just at that point trying to get used to wearing contact lenses. Actually, she was having a romantic relationship with someone else at Seabury. And she was thinking that she shouldn't wear glasses. But going back and forth on the train from New York, when she had to commute into New York every day, she could not work. She could not work on her manuscripts or even read the paper because getting used to the new kinds of glasses, the contact lenses, and working at the same time on a train that, shook as she was working. It just was too much for her. So she left the Seabury Press, and she became a freelancer, and she was working freelance out of her apartment in Greenwich. She was such a good editor that we needed someone like her on some of the scientific publications of the museum, where great scientists couldn't really write. They knew what they wanted to say, but they just didn't have the skill at writing. So she began working on scientific publications, and she would come into the office in New York, and I got to know her better that way. And we became good friends. In fact, she asked me to do some editing on some of the other work that she was doing. She was still editing for the Seabury Press, particularly a children's science series that was used in Sunday schools and in teaching. And she gave me some manuscripts, which I did as freelance work while I was still at the museum. So I knew her that way, but I didn't really get to know her well until in 1967, while I was at Yale Medical School. She had to leave her Greenwich apartment because she was no longer living in the little tiny one right next to Dorothy's. She had moved into a large, very comfortable apartment on an upper floor, and the owner of the building wanted to move in to that apartment. And I think there was some kind of a form, a thing that it couldn't be rented to anybody else, but if the owner wanted it, the owner could kick Casey out, which the owner did. So Casey had to find another place to live, and she came up to this area, and she wanted to be on the water, and she found this house, and she bought it. And that was in the spring of 67. And that summer, her cat got very sick, and I think it was spraying. Some spraying had been done out here, and the cat was under the bush that was being sprayed, and it really got poisoned. And Casey called me, and really feeling very badly. She was very fond of that cat, and said she needed a vet. Did I have a vet? and I had a vet. She took the cat down to my vet in Clinton, and eventually, soon, the cat died. And she called me to tell me that the cat had died, and she was crying on the phone. And I said, well, come on over and I'll fix you supper, and we'll talk about it. And she came over to my house in Madison, and after that, we really became friends. We got to know each other very well, and that was during that period from then until I left Yale at the end of 1969. She was working here, freelancing, and we visited back and forth a great deal. And then she suggested that we start a business together.